Hi everyone, Mike Levin. Thursday, May 24th, 2018 at around 8:30 a.m. And I'm here on the second floor of Irby walking through what I like to call here the looking glass. There's this really funky lighting you can see behind me here in just this tiny section of the hallway. And the thing about the second floor, even though I don't live on it, is that it is the shortest walk down the stairwell to get to the back exit, which I'm about to do here, because it's a very interesting week this week here with Memorial Day weekend. It's Fleet Week, and I happen to live right smack in the center of the Old Navy base. This facility, Irby, is built on the Old Navy base. It's causing some mixed feelings, some tensions here, because before Hurricane Sandy washed everything away, right here was the facility for the soldiers, and they had a pool room and they could hang out. And now I think they built something a little smaller further up, but nothing like the old facilities they had here. And it's also strangely pool opening weekend here. So we're gonna have our first weekend of the season with the swimming pool open. This cool saltwater, I think, heated pool. It's gonna be a crazy experience, as is almost everything here at Irby. And so this is the back exit, which I love to go out, and activity is starting to happen all around here. I guess part of it is just Fleet Week, and part of it is, you know, they're building stuff, and it might not ever become that whole waterfront project that they're talking about with a Ferris wheel and a boardwalk going the whole way, but it certainly is already just spectacularly beautiful. And you know, when it came about that I was moving from Inwood, Manhattan, which by the way is the tippy top of Manhattan, Broadway goes from the south end where the ferry terminal is all the way up through at this strange angle, and then the whole island narrows down, and right on the other side of the Broadway bridge is the Bronx. That's where I lived, the Manhattan side of that bridge. Even on the Bronx side, I think it's called Morningside Heights, there's a little neighborhood that still has a mailing address of Manhattan. So I think what I'm gonna do is, I guess, just point out some stuff about Fleet Week. There's the whole vendor station, the food station set up, and all the boats have just docked, and I'll be talking to my daughter this weekend about seeing them come in, and you can actually tour them. You can take a tour, so I'm going to make sure I take her out there on those this weekend. That's going to be just a wonderful you know, bonus thrown in here on top of the pool opening. It'll be interesting to see if there's any, you know, I don't expect any strangeness, but I guess given that, you know, it's a few years in, whatever was there has hopefully you know, been I guess discussed or whatever. I think that the most interesting thing to show right now is the secret almost hidden part of the waterfront park we have, because it's been fenced off for so long. And it's so funny how the dog owners loved to be out in that field, because it was perfect. Even with the gate up, it enclosed it, and it was a perfect dog run. So there was this cat and mouse game of, I guess it was the Parks Department who was working on this beautiful reclamation project, which I was talking about in Inwood. It's often hard to believe I would ever live anywhere as beautiful and, you know, maybe even more beautiful than Inwood. There has this whole saltwater marsh, inland marsh thing going on, and this is New York Harbor right here, and there's a little dock here we have. This was all gated off. You can still see behind me the crazy, you know, gating, and then where it opens up. This is new. You couldn't walk through there before. There's another spot up here that I'll show you. But before I do, I'll show you how they made these, I don't even know what you call them. Maybe they're breakers, but you know, the water level here is actually higher, just a little bit, than the ocean. And it creates this, I guess, swampy marshland. And you can see the ducks enjoying themselves there in the background. That's the Verrazano Bridge, a bridge whose architecture had to take into account the actual curvature of the Earth's surface in its design. Let's see what else. I guess, you know, just given the general layout, the Verrazano goes between Staten Island and Brooklyn. So that's Brooklyn. As we follow Brooklyn around, Brooklyn only lasts so far before we get Manhattan. And I believe, you know, it's hard to see the break in the land. This is the ferry ride I take every day. The Statue of Liberty is out there. You probably can't see a lot of the Manhattan stuff because the ships are in front of it. But hey, happy Fleet Week, right? This is more about Fleet Week than it is about Manhattan. So this is my morning walk where I clear my mind. If I'm going to be doing a work from home day, I can't just start sitting at my desk and working. I need to be out in the sun, especially in this kind of weather, energize myself and you know, think through my challenge of the day. What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? It's all a narrative. It's all a story. And so I thought I'd talk a moment about the art aspect of what I'm doing as a separate thing from, you know, delivering a value for a paycheck, you know, a service, a deliverable. It's all about products, and it's all a little bit about the show, you know, that surrounds the delivery of the product, because you can't just, as they do in many agencies, throw a PowerPoint over the fence and land an attachment in an inbox, talk them through it maybe on a, you know, video conference. And that's so much of agency life. But when you're an internal person, you're going for something a lot better. Oh, by the way, this is the other open area to the park. This was not open before. These are probably the wonderful people who did all this reclamation work. And when I say reclamation work, this wasn't this beautiful before. This is managed property going on here. They really have even the strings going up in order to do whatever tiered land, you know, things that they do. It's just, you know, very planned out. Extremely reminiscent of what was going on in the Inwood neighborhood I moved from, where Columbia University took over a lot of that waterfront property that was otherwise quite murky and polluted and very non-marsh-like. It's strange. I think that there was this image that the swampland or the salt marsh aesthetic was bad, and New Jersey, Staten Island, it's all so much just that swampland, and there was this process of draining it, filling it in, and making the next neighborhood. And that's half of New Jersey, and it seems to be quite a bit of Staten Island too. But here on Staten Island, I think they had given into or yielded to the natural architecture and shape. It's not quite as flat as most of Jersey. So you get a lot of interesting what is it? It's landscape. It's the lay of the land is interesting. It's taking me a long time to remap it all in my head, exactly how these roads get laid out. You can get almost everywhere without a highway.
Yeah, and the fence line.
But the route is all over the place. It's crazy. And this is really related to the work. API nuances. The difference between the art and the business aspect of what I'm doing. So I always have to keep delivering. I always have to keep that next goal in mind, that next thing that keeps moving everything forward. And for that, I adopt what I think of as the 80-20 rule. You always want to organize your work so you bank the most valuable parts soonest. So if you have to stop, you go, look, I got all this done. And so you front load that kind of thing, even if it means making some controversial or contrary decisions about how other people would like stuff done. And that gets to the artistic part of this. I've done this type of work so many times that I know every pitfall that I will encounter. It's not like, will I encounter these pitfalls? I will encounter these pitfalls. And what I'm doing is I'm taking that into account in the creation of a new system. Systems are nothing if not intended to be thrown out in a few years. None of these systems last. People in the Ruby on Rails community seeing that first version that took the world by storm, now what are they up to, version 5 or whatever, and all that sort of magic that was a special thing about that original version has been everythinged away. Things decay. That original spark of specialness was because someone was innovating at a time, doing things a new way that nobody else did that way. So you were willing to live with this set of compromises to get this set of radical advantages. And then that difference that's created, that difference in the entropy of what has now become possible, new little people able to burst onto the scene and become a new player, whereas they were shut out before because the old methods, required too many resources. Now new ways of doing things. Disruption, right? Disruption is all about what's going on right now. And the ability to thrive on the fault line, all those Jeffrey Mooreisms, and was that it? No, Malcolm Gladwell, Jeffrey, yeah, right, it's all those guys mixed together. All these business truisms that are the subject of mostly marketing books, but there's always a sort of mathematics behind it all. Statistical mathematics primarily, which gets to where I'm gradually repositioning my field to. Understanding how things work on a more abstract and fundamental basis through real physics. All these books I'm listening to. Our Mathematical Universe is the latest. It's really coloring my thinking. I could not have chosen a better one to follow up on my recent books I've been talking about. The Chaos one, the Information one, the Elegant Universe, which was a superstring one. There was another one that was all about quantum loop gravity, as loop quantum gravity. Everything about that theory that makes it the most simple and most likely to be correct, they're messing up with things like labeling it. Loop quantum gravity. Now you have this difficulty in counterintuitive word order you have to remember just to reference a theory, whereas the other one is superstrings, right? Of course, and it's got the marketing might of Michio Kaku and those, superstar physicists behind it. Whereas loop quantum gravity is so much more low-key because Occam's razor is the simplest solution to grand unified theory. That doesn't sound sexy. It's got to be more complicated than that. No, there's a Planck unit sized particle, which is also 1 unit of space-time, which is also, probably the size of the universe at the moment of the Big Bang, the thing that underwent inflation, which is itself much smaller than a quanta of light, a photon. So it all kind of makes sense and ties together. So where am I going with that? Where day-to-day work, thinking through, can you even jump back and forth like that? Does that even make sense? Well, API simplification. Every system is intended to be thrown out because it serves its purpose, and by the time it's been around for a while serving its purpose, it's now the subsystem of something else which did all this other stuff better beforehand. And so you got this process of experimental systems popping up in the network as sort of standalone nodes, setting a model, a template. Other things copy that template, and then the original thing, as awesome as it was, taking advantage of an potential that was there that nobody saw before, it cannot be long-lived and it dies out. This is one of the many reasons why superior technologies fail all the time. So I've made a number of systems, and when I say systems, I mean there's a bunch of parts to it, and the parts have to be in a certain place, and you know, their settings have to be made just so for their unique instance. And then you have input-output systems. One of them you have to just look at to make sure everything's still running, right? A monitoring system. And then other ones which are the output for other folks in the picture. So it's always more than just like input-output with you providing input and the computer sending output back at you. You almost have to think of these things as spokes of a wheel. Let's see, other stakeholders at the ends of those spokes, and the network in the middle. The network is the computer, the internet, whatever. But then there's people who are not directly interacting with you. I am not standing right in front of you right now. I am providing input to the YouTubes, and the YouTubes is providing search, and some people subscribe, and those people are at the end of the spoke. Sometimes, not all the time, sometimes it's different spokes. It's dynamic, but you know, everything works that way. The physical parts in this are my iPhone. I still use the iPhone a lot for this type of work because it's just lighter to hold up in front of me. I don't use a selfie stick than the Note 8 is. And I'm a 2 phones person, oh my God. Even just that second opinion, 2 is very, very different than 1. Everything quadratically increases. It's something times itself. You have to deal with issues that you would have never had to deal with if it were only just one instance ever. So, you know, numbers occur in nature. The fractal trick is you got an instance of something, you're gonna have other instances of it. I'm sorry, it's just that is how nature works. But those other instances might or might not be exact copies depending on the space you're occupying, the mechanism of the copy or the reflection. And so fractals are often when your second copy is a fraction of the size of the original but has its original shape. So then you get all these questions about how things happen, say, over time. Does that mean if you change that outer shape, it's going to instantaneously reflect and spiral down the entire, you know, reflection chain and recursion, whatever you want to call it? Oh boy, this discussion could go down the recursion path, so that would be bad. There's also deliberate iteration over collections. That sequences are better. I'm going to try and make sure that everything I do can be expressed in terms of a sequence. In other words, stories. Stories are important, the order of things. So you've got one of these communication networks with nodes and, you know, input output, usually humans around the outside hardware and some sort of communication network as the, you know, in between. By the way, you can see here all this stuff like news vans are here. You know, this is Fleet Week. I think this is a pretty big deal. They put up all these barriers down here to separate certain areas off and to keep cars from driving through the back road here, as they sometimes do at Irby. And I guess I'll finish out this walk with, oh, I don't think I can even go down into that area. I might be cut off from my own Irby. I'm not sure if that's for everybody or just for cars. Yeah, I don't need to find out. That's the vendor area back there, and I guess when the sailors come off of the ship, they depart and they have some refreshments or whatever before they come out into Staten Island. There's going to be a whole bunch of entertainment. There's going to be music. This is just not when the main events are going on. I think you just Google Fleet Week. Fleet Week Staten Island, and it'll tell you about all the stuff that's going to be going on here. I'll have my daughter here for Memorial Day weekend, which is kind of a big deal. It's our first weekend not being at our Catskills place, which is a traditional opening of the season there. But we are going to have our pool opening, and it's going to be Fleet Week with festivities in our backyard. How could we not be here? I see them doing something with this space that I've never seen open before. That'll be interesting to see what they do. Yeah, so wind up your thoughts, Mike, and hit the desk or hit out here. Oh my God, with my T-Mobile unlimited streaming and the VPN, I can sit down and work anywhere. I'm gonna go get that laptop and find a great place outside to sit. But what I'm gonna be working through is why I'm not making a system that's gonna inevitably die. Instead, I'm making a wave that's traveling forward in time. Think of it as a GitHub repo with the head of the repo always having a file inside of it that represents the latest, greatest expression of the system as a single, what in any other system like this would be considered a configuration file, though what it is all the Python it takes to run these data master tasks, these mostly Google Sheets based dashboards for marketing purposes, that does in fact have other code going on. The punchline of the thing is, of course, there's more than just that one config file. You do pip installs of this and that, and as you do all the time, right? You always need some package. Does that mean you are using a framework? Does that mean you're doing things on Rails? Does that mean that when you look at things, it's going to look like anything other than just generic, easily readable Python that is not encumbered with a framework or a system that's bound to become obsolete? No, you just do a few pip installs and make them as part of the requirement of the project. And as long as the things you're pip installing are going to be there in the future. So the requests object from Kenneth Wright, absolutely, which in turn uses Werkzeug, I don't know, for routing, and then it uses, underneath, what is it? This routing and a couple other things. Anyway, URL lib3 for the HTTP protocol stuff, and I think and the Jinja 2 templates, although it can also use the Mako templates for the PHP templating part of it. So that's Flask. Flask brings together those, so you get all this beautiful, rich web development stuff that just sort of magically gets appended onto Python when you use these @decorators above your function names, which is not unique to Flask. It's used everywhere in Python now, but it instills your functions with these magical properties, things like caching. So in Flask, using a decorator above a function name, that's the little @ symbol in a word, above the def function name, colon, by using a decorator above it, in Flask, you're making a routing control. It means a page request is going to be sent through this function. So this function handles the page request that maps to that decorator's details. But in the way I'm using decorators in the latest Pipulate is a caching system. So you hit APIs so much, one of the most common problems I'm finding is that if I'm using pandas to replace matrix cell processing, in other words, you sweep through a spreadsheet left to right, row by row, like mowing a lawn, and every cell you encounter, you treat this thing like a Turing machine. It reads the contents of the cell, it uses it as input, and it has instructions like use these values on this row, maybe the value from the cell, probably not, that's going to be where you're going to plug the result into. So use values from prior cells on my row, do this Python function, which can be anything within the capabilities of Python. So it could crawl a site, come back with some return data, return it to pandas. Pandas plugs that value in the data frame, and then the piece that comes from me in the pip install Pipulate, you use simply to blit objects in and out of memory between Google Sheets and Pandas. Google Sheets, Pandas, blit rectangular object, do data frame transformation stuff per every scientist in the world these days. Crisis of accountability, Continuum IO, IPython, R, Jupyter Notebook. Google these things. Jump on that bandwagon. You can express automations now. You can express things that you used to express in Excel in Python Pandas. When I say Python Pandas, I'm saying Microsoft Excel. The analogy is not analogous. It's literally all these functions you can do in Excel, you can pretty much do over here in Pandas, except you don't have drop-down menus on, graphical spreadsheets. Natively in Pandas or Jupyter Notebook, you can use Matplotlib to draw some pretty graphs. That's great. But what you really want is this kind of row and column data to live in Excel. For lack of Excel in a usable web API, free, unburdened from all this nonsense way, we use Google Docs, Google Sheets in particular, which is burdened in its own special ways by virtue of being, part of the Google suite. But you're already drinking the Google Kool-Aid. Come on, what you're doing is some sort of research probably to perform better in Google or some such service that's going to be on an Android phone. Accept you're in a Google world, and once you accept that you're going to be drinking some of the Google Kool-Aid somewhere along the line, even for audience development purposes, in for a penny, in for a pound, learn to use the whatever they're calling it today, but Google on API console, Google API console, Google Developer API console. Basically, every service available under Google can be turned on and off on a per account basis. And if you're on a Google corporate account, meaning that your email address lets you use Gmail as your email program, and you can use Google Docs and share with other people in your company, you might have sort of a global Google login context, which is an invaluable thing. If you ever deal with headache over logins and you only pay for a license for one seat and multiple people in a group log in under that one, and it causes confusion, and special plugins are required for a special browser condition for things to happen. So the alternative to that whole world is just use free and open source everything on the back end, starting out with Jupyter Notebook so you can crawl before you can walk. If it's easy enough for scientists, it's easy enough for you, because scientists are not tech jocks. And it's just as intimidating and annoying to them to have to meticulously manage their own data and the processes that prepare it for analysis as it is for you, the marketing geek, to hit that API, to pull back data, to optionally warehouse the raw API data pull, to parse out the pieces you need it, to put those in some raw data collection columns, to apply some formula, to take the output of that formula, put it in another column, and then to, visualize it in a graph or a chart, and to use that in a PowerPoint slide. This is just as annoying for scientists. They hate it. It's not the research. It's not their thing. So Continuum IO packaged up a package called Anaconda. Anaconda installs Jupyter Notebook, Python, R, and a bunch of other key things that make what amounts to a unified computing platform. So I know a lot about this because I think a lot about this, and I've made my own distribution of Linux, pretty much intended for the same end result, a portable place that will run this little Noah's Ark of Python. So you package up something much like a container, much like Docker or whatever, but it doesn't require any fancy stuff, and its footprint is 60 megabytes as opposed to 60 gigabytes or whatever. 60 megabytes even opposed to 1 gigabyte. Huge difference. That's after it's uncompressed. My virtual machine Linux was distributable over 20 megabytes, still popular out there today, called Levinux. You don't need it. just install Anaconda, because the computing platform, the Noah's Ark that's being invoked on your desktop, your laptop, whatever, is the thing that's solving the scientific community's crisis of accountability, the 30-some% of non-reproducible results. Big deal. It is a big deal. It's solved. Solving it has caused a bandwagon in science. That bandwagon has broad and deep connections to the marketing community. Yeah, so we get to corrupt it again. So anyway, I talk about how I have no real love for my field of SEO, but that's not true. I only do things I love. So videos like this are finding the love-worthy bits and doing the things you do every day, even if you're punching a clock for an employer, to be doing it for yourself, to be feeding your soul, and to be doing a thing first for yourself because you love it and it benefits you, and second because it's also exactly what your employer needs and it benefits them monetarily, probably much more than it benefits you, which again gets to the heart of who you are. You know, what kind of person are you? If I was really just concerned with what monetarily benefited me the most, I'd be jumping right on the Python online education bandwagon, because education is how many $1 trillion of a year business, and it's easily delivered. The mechanics surrounding it is no big deal. You basically have to just produce quality content. It can be interactive if you want. You know, you can incorporate files that should be loaded off of GitHub while you follow along in some video. So it's firmly within my skill set. I could be setting up that cash register and saying, take these courses, support me on Patreon. That's probably coming. Prepare for that, me starting to move you in that direction. But I really don't want those pressures. I'm a journey is the reward guy, and I love what I do, and I'm gonna keep loving what I do. And to keep loving SEO, I am learning to be a true data ninja. I know that kind of term is thrown around all the time. Forget ninja, samurai. You want to be out there proud of, in the bright light about what you're doing, why you're in it. There's a whole discussion there I will not get into, but anything based on those martial arts is, you know, a little bit warfare, a little bit, you know, adversarial, and ultimately confrontational. And, you know, ninjas do the confrontation under cover of shadow. And then there's other people who are like, no, let a lord hire me, spare them the necessity of having to have wars and, you know, go to battle with their neighboring, you know, country states, whatever they were back then in feudal Japan. And instead just have the samurai who takes care of business. And I want to be a data samurai. And samurai swords are a very interesting, anomalous, weird, nano-fabricated thing in our history. You ought to go Google them up, learn about samurai swords. You know, it wasn't just about the physical skills, but it was also about a certain being in tune with your tools. You know, a great samurai sword can only make a highly skilled person that much more effective. So you want the double whammy of the best tools and the highest degree of expressing what's up here through those tools, as if it's an extension of your body. And I failed to find that over and over, or when I found it, the platform has disappeared. Lots of broken heart stories. I think I touched on that in the last video. And I'm thinking, at approaching 50 years old, yes, I'm almost 50, I've tried a little of this, I've tried a little of that. I'm at the point where my resume and my LinkedIn profile is mostly just about distillation of the coolest stuff. The coolest stuff right now that I'd feel comfortable banking the rest of my career on, say some 20 years until I find something else fun to do, and that I feel I will find Loveworthy every day is Python. That's at the center of it. The whole platform is Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, but that should just as well be stated as necessary evil, Python, kind of cool samurai sword, could be better, but come on, it's, you know, it hit something right. And what I just said, again, Vim and Git. Can't get away from Git because Git has become part of the fabric of technology. If you don't use Git, use Mercurial HG, which is written in Python, native Python with parts optimized in C, just like so much other Python packages that are popular. But, you know, you'll be learning Git, you'll be learning HG because you'll also be learning JIT, and it makes it legit because you got to do Git. Whole other video there. And Vim, I've done those videos. Eventually set aside a month of your life where you say, this is the main thing I'm focusing on this month. I'm learning Vim. Give it that try. Get over the initial frustration. Congratulations, welcome to being human. Everything worth doing is going to be difficult. When you learn to walk, you remember how difficult that was? No, of course you won't, and you won't remember. Well, you will. You'll fondly remember how difficult Vim was to learn. And then in about 10 years, you'll be telepathically controlling text, and Vim will be embedded in our heads. It'll be the safe firewall connection between telepathy and, you know, mind reading, right? There's got to be all kinds of, you know, hardware enforced protocol rules around how that's going to work. And just like everything else, just like Unix and Linux, you could do worse. Necessary evil. You know, sure, could have been some Lisp operating system, or could have been OS 9 or whatever other BOS, you know, next step. There's so many superior operating systems that were out there back in the day that all got steamrolled under, you know, what the Unix Haters Handbook would describe as a virus, just good enough, and a good license, and a license that encouraged, once Linux came out, a righteous feedback loop. And you can't beat something that's good enough, that gets in early, that creates those righteous feedback loops, and is the reality of the day. That's Unix, that's Linux, so just accept it. And find the Loveworthy bits in it, which is the short commands like ls and cd, and Git for that matter. When I talk about Git and Vim, they're just two more commands you'll run from Linux, with lots of subcommands. That's the spirit of Linux. Short commands, each of which you could spend a lifetime mastering, that because they have a lot of subcommands. So it's all about that breaking up of the granularity. And so things seem extremely difficult to figure out because of their opacity at first. And then you start looking at the APIs and the documentation, it becomes a little bit clearer, but not entirely. You know, it's still, you know, there's nothing worse than API documentation. So then there's experience, logical thought, experimentation, trying, working like that robot that backs up, turns a little bit, tries again, and does it in such a way so that the work you produce is not some giant spaghetti code script that you're going to hate to maintain a year from now. Everyone else who has to look at it is going to hate to look at it and maintain. So even once you get it down and you get it right, your code's bloated and ugly. So this starts an iterative process of re-implementing and re-implementing, not just refining, but new places you work, new projects, new aspects to those projects that shape and temper. It's the folding, it's the tempering. And I'm on Pipulate version, I don't know, I guess in my mind I would think 3. First being very close to 360i Tiger. Second being the Flask micro framework version where there had to be a web server in the picture. And this third one, which is based on Jupyter Notebook. If you're going to use Pipulate, and especially if you're new to it, if you're in that flock of marketing people who are becoming technical because Jupyter Notebook and Python and the Anaconda install, then pip install Pipulate, import Pipulate as GS for Google Sheets or Good Sheet, take your pick, and try to blit a rectangular region out of Google Sheets with a Pipulate command, gs.pipulate, rows, columns, optional column names, and then populate it with gs.populate, reference to object from the original select. Bam! You have now pulled data out of Google Sheets, pushed data back into Google Sheets, and now everything else that I'm working on today is the tooling surrounding that. So it's as little Python as possible. That's the art versus just punching a clock. If you're just punching a clock, let the code grow big, make all sorts of long-term liability issues that make you a dependency of that automation running forward. Job security, always something that's justifiable to fix that you need to spend your time on. Or make the code short, precise, beautiful, not look like it's using a framework, but yet nonetheless the pip installs that allow you to make the code so short is in fact the framework, just like Flask does. And compact that down into highly identified labeled regions, pulling in configuration data, doing the data transforms, pushing the data back out to Google Sheets, whatever else, doing timestamps to show when things are processed. Make it all very clear, very laid out, as short and yet still expressive, both short and expressive of code as you can possibly make it. And so that either you can maintain it in the future, in which case it will be a pleasure to do so, because every time you look at it, the artistry of it impresses you all anew. Or you can hand it off to other people who, for those exact same reasons, will be happy to have it handed to them, because it will be unlike all that other mess and tangle of stuff they've ever been handed in their life. That's what I'm doing today. I'm making the config files of Pipulate exactly that beautiful. Whew. Hard to express that, but you know, it feels good. It feels like the first time I'm doing that as the main criteria of one of my systems. And hence, there's always a head to a GitHub repo, which literally has in it a file that is the best, most recent master example of everything about the system, because the only rest of it is those imports from the pip installs. You import this, you import that, you import pandas as PD, you import numpy as NP, just like is done all the time. That's not a framework, right? That's just a few imports. And then you've got a config file, which is the script. Python is a scripting language. Scripting languages are mysteriously powerful for how little code they are. All you got to get down is the 24/7 enterprise reliability piece, and bam. You, of moderate technical ability, can you do Excel macros? If you've ever done Excel macros in your life, you've done things about 5 times harder than what I'm asking of you with this transition from where you are today in the marketing world, maybe an Excel jockey, maybe able to modify some app scripts under Google Sheets, to having Python in the back end where all your first pass work is done in Jupyter Notebook, and then you lift that Jupyter Notebook code and you drop it into the minimal generic Linux scheduler out there using systemd. Few files, easy to read, no deployment systems, no Java dependencies, nothing to burden it down, and everything about the system easy to explain, easy to pay for, easy to justify, and you know, just has that nature of the work you like to do. So anyway, thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.